If you're new to GlobeTrotting, be sure to hit that subscribe button. The Boeing 787-3 was a much talked about aircraft variant by the American manufacturer at a time when introducing the widebody to the world. This prospective aircraft would have aimed to offer something different to its counterparts, with a smaller capacity and form a fundamental part of the initial entry into this market for this beloved series that we now know today to be the Dreamliner. Ultimately, however, the aircraft wouldn't eventuate, and Boeing would proceed with three other variations instead. So what was the 787-3? Why was it introduced? Why wasn't it launched? And was it ultimately the right decision, all things considered? The 787-3 was introduced in the early 2000s, this part of Boeing's broader Dreamliner program. Unlike other variants in the family, it was designed for shorter routes between high-traffic hubs. From a specification standpoint, the aircraft was to be the same length as the now-released 787-8, but its wingspan was more aimed at fitting into a broader gate range at airports right around the world. Boeing would focus on wings to align it with Aerodome reference codes, allowing it to slot into 757 and 767 slots. Moreover, it could operate routes served by this aircraft, obviously in a way more efficient manner. The 787-3, in essence, would carry around 290 to 330 passengers, this in a standard two-class configuration, and be able to fly upwards of 5,600 kilometers, or just over 3,510 miles. After being proposed, the aircraft became a relatively quick hit in Asia, specifically in Japan, with orders coming through from Japan Airlines and ANA. Despite the concept's appeal, the 787-3 definitely faced its challenges. From the design standpoint, which focused on accommodating more narrow taxiways seen across Japanese airports, it made it a niche variant compared to its sibling variants that would eventually go on to launch. Ultimately, demand for the high-density, short-haul Dreamliner variant was insufficient to justify production, especially as the longer-ranged version 787 gained popularity. In 2010, Boeing would formally drop the 787-3, refocusing its efforts on the 787-8 and 787-9. Could Boeing launch a 787-3 now, however? Maybe some would argue that it would be optimal, considering that we don't have a middle-of-the-market airliner or a true bridge between the MAX and the 787. Well, generally from a specification standpoint, the 787-3 was not really intended as a middle-of-the-market airliner, and Boeing would eventually scrap this short-haul Dreamliner in 2010. Unfortunately, Boeing's future outlook has dramatically changed over the last 5 years, certainly the last 14, following many internal issues that have really damaged the business. As such, Boeing finds itself in a position where instead of focusing solely on innovating, as a company like it once did, it is more focusing on the rebuild and mitigation of production delays, financial pressures, and overall setbacks to its reputation. Boeing has always remained cautious about introducing new aircraft, but this has certainly been heightened tenfold in the last decade, especially the last few years, when even if, say, it wanted to proceed with maybe a new aircraft, it would likely not be able to from a resource and regulator standpoint, which is obviously unfortunate, but if you ask them, they'd probably say they have no one else to blame bar themselves. Whether a clean sheet or even something like the scrapped 787-3, which was already proposed, launching new programs require significant financial investments. Developing a new or revived variant like the 787-3 would involve pretty hefty costs, including the retooling of production lines, recertification processes, and meeting all the high safety standards that have now been laid out for the plane maker. Boeing's financial resources and manpower are already stretched, and the added risk of developing a 787-3 at this point would be a bad look for the many uncertified programs that are already present and frustrating airline customers that have been around long before the 787-3. Would a 787-3 be worth it? Well, airline customers will play a major role in an aircraft manufacturer's decision to proceed with a new aircraft type. Ultimately, while a Boeing idea on paper can be good if no airline customer actually expresses interest interest in it, well, there's little to no point in proceeding with it. Would a 787-3 be a good investment for Boeing now, or will its fate in the mid-2020s be the same as a catalyst for why it was cancelled over a decade and a half ago? The middle of the market segment remains largely underserved. While Airbus has moved ahead with its XLR from the A321 program, some airlines are still hopeful that something will come from Boeing, although that is fading consistently. While the 787-3's original concept as a high-density, shorter-range aircraft could appeal to airlines operating on crowded domestic and regional routes, it did face limitations and limited interest as well right from the offing on a more global scale. Nowadays, airlines that may have sought something like the 787-3 have gone in the opposite direction, whether that is single-aisle narrow-bodies or consolidating to, say, just Dreamliner variants, with Airbus and Boeing putting forward their best attempts at a high-capacity single-aisle. In the realm of airlines calling for new aircraft, the Dash 3 offered by Boeing is not one at its very core that has re-emerged as a prospective solution, and as such, would likely not be worthy of the investment required to see a return occur. It really was the wrong time for Boeing. Revisiting the 787-3 at the time now would require Boeing to divert resources from its current priorities, which have only continued to grow with time and put a strain on its day-to-day operations, remembering that that strain is already being felt without the need for a 787-3. When considering the investment and even the lengthy certification process that would add to the already existing aircraft that can't seem to get approved, it becomes a completely wrong place, wrong time thing. Furthermore, with little to no interest, at least from a public standpoint from what we've heard, while the variant's premise had some backing some time ago, its cancellation in 2010 certainly seemed to be the right decision. If the industry had shaped differently and Boeing hadn't taken a downward spiral in the late 2010s, further development of the 787 could have very well occurred, but probably not through a 787-3, potentially something different. Today, Boeing remains better off focusing on stabilizing other fundamental areas of its company, away from a prospective cancelled 787-3. New aircraft are still on the horizon through the continued studies of the TTBW and Boeing's knowledge that it must still focus on the long term. But given a lot of the complexities around its business and even just waiting on technological developments, these prospects are a lot further away. What are your thoughts on the 787-3? Let me know down below in the comments. Thanks a bunch for your support here on the channel. Please take care, be safe, and I'll see you in a couple of days for your latest industry analysis.